our relationship goes back quite a long time, and there's a number of chapters that have been written into this story, and the story is still not over. There are still, I'm sure, a number of chapters that will have to be written into this story. But first of all, next year will be the 50th anniversary of the Ankara Agreement. This is the longest, I think, agreement that is still in place that the EU has with the third country. So it shows you our patience. This year has been the 25th anniversary of our application for full membership. So despite many Turks who have been saying that we have been at the door of the EU for 50 years, no, it's actually 25 years. But that is still a very long time. In 1995, we initiated and completed a customs union because at the time it was very difficult to move ahead. So as a stepping stone for full membership, we had decided to have a customs union. And it's been 17 years since we've had a customs union. At that time, we thought that the customs union would last for a couple of years and that we would be on our road for full membership. This didn't happen. Now the customs union has its own problems. And as you mentioned, Turkey has been a candidate since 13 years. In 1999, in Helsinki, Turkey was finally considered to be, or accepted to be a candidate for full membership. It's been 7 years since we started negotiations, and I'll go into that in a few minutes. And at the time, we had started negotiations with Croatia, and Croatia will be a member next year. So in 8 years, they have become members, while we are still lagging far behind. And 15 is the number of regular reports that have been written by the Commission on Turkey. I think we hold the record on this, 15. Some other countries have already completed theirs. Croatia has started with us, and now they're ending, so we have the most. And therefore, we feel the right to complain more about the regular reports and how they're written, and we think that we should have a better editing of these reports. Now, what I'd like to tell you is that although we have concentrated a lot on accession, the relationship comprises quite a bit more. Of course, when we started out 50 years ago, we started off with trade, financial cooperation, economy. And that was the gist of it. So politics, of course, was involved, but to a lesser extent. And in those years, Turkey was, of course, a rather poor country. The reason why we had completed this Ankara agreement at the time was because Greece had applied for the EEC as well, or the EEC at the time. In those days, in the Cold War era, whenever Greece or Turkey applied for something, the other side did it as well. So in those days, we entered always together. And since then, of course, our relationship has flourished with the EU. Despite what everybody has said, it has gone into all these areas with regard to political dialogue, trade, investment. Right now, the most investment that comes to Turkey is from EU countries, 85% to 90%. Nobody knows the real figure, but it's huge. We are, especially in this house, I guess you would know that Erasmus and other programs are very, very important for Turkey. There are quite a number of thousands of students that have come to Turkey or from Turkey to the European Union countries. And this is, I think, one of the most important components of our relationship, in which we cherish very much. Also, the community programs. There are a number of community programs that have been open to Turkey in the last 15 to 20 years. And Turkey is participating to them, paying its due, contributing to its budget. So the relationship between Turkey and the EU is quite intrinsic, linked at many places. Now, if I can turn to the accession negotiations, because this is, unfortunately, the most important component. And the fact that we have other relations are being overshadowed by the accession negotiations. Now, you all know that normally there are a number of chapters. In the past, for the other candidate states, there had been less number of chapters, but these have increased. But that's not the important thing. It comprises the whole of the acquis. So for Turkey, we have 35 chapters to negotiate. And amongst them, 13 have been opened so far in the last 7 years. The big problem is these numbers. Now, these are the numbers that have been blocked so far. 8 have been blocked by a council decision on the Cyprus issue. Just to give you a recap of why this has happened, when Turkey became not only candidate but was going to open negotiations in 2004, we had accepted to sign an additional protocol. I won't go into that detail unless you ask me for it. And that additional protocol meant that we would apply the customs union to all the new members at the time. This included Greek Cyprus. But before the Cypriots became members, the EU had made also a commitment to alleviate the isolation of the Turkish Cypriots. And since this has not been met, we decided not to fulfill that part of the additional protocol. So in 2006, the Council took a decision to block 8 chapters. Subsequently, since we did not comply, another year passed and we did not comply with that again, then the Greek Cypriots themselves unilaterally blocked 6 more chapters. And the chapters that were blocked by France were done by only one person, Mr. Sarkozy at the time. He had said that Turkey has no place in the Union, so he would be blocking 5 chapters actually, but one is comprised with the Council decision. So he said that I'm blocking those chapters that are related to full membership, as if the others aren't. So right now we have 18 block chapters. This means that we have only 3 chapters that are neither blocked nor open yet. These are 3 chapters that are quite difficult to open. These are public procurement, social policy, and competition. These chapters are difficult for any country, and we always wondered why these 3 chapters were left open to, without any political blockage. And unfortunately, these 3 chapters are still out there. We are still discussing this with the union, but this is the summary of the situation with regard to negotiations. Since nothing has happened in the last 2.5 years, we have passed 5 presidencies without opening any chapter. The Commission, of course, was in disarray. They didn't know what to do about it. So they came up with another innovative idea called the positive agenda. They said that if we cannot go ahead with the normal accession negotiations, let's try to do something informally, in a way circumvent the process, but then again move ahead. And last year in December they devised this positive agenda, which we accepted as well because we thought that it was something that we can move on. And this positive agenda comprises these elements, basically the ones that I mentioned above also. With regard to the chapters and the acquis communautaire, this means that amongst those chapters that have not been opened yet, although we believe that they could be open, and some of the chapters that have actually been opened but are not moving ahead, we have formed informal working groups so that we can proceed. And funnily enough, these have produced results because the Commission lately has informed us that we have been able to meet some of the benchmarks that these chapters have. Of course, this is all done on an informal basis. In the end, the member states will say whether it has actually been met or not. But at least this has given us some momentum. Foreign policy dialogue is one of the, I think, the crucial aspects, and I'll get to that a bit more later on. This has been very, very positive because at every stage, at every level, we have been able to have coordination and cooperation. Lady Ashton and our foreign minister are on speaking terms almost every other day. We have high-level contacts, and we have contacts on almost all issues. So this is an area in which I think the relationship is flourishing. Energy cooperation, despite the fact that the energy chapter has not been opened, there is cooperation on this. Commissioner Oettinger is in contact with our energy minister, and they're trying to find ways in which the policies can complement each other. Now, the visa liberalization is a crucial aspect for Turkey. I'm sure that most of you know that visa is a very important issue for Turkey. Turkish citizens need to apply for a visa to come to the European Union countries, and they go through a hell of a process. Sometimes very demeaning, very disturbing, and so this is an area in which we are trying to find a way out. One way out is in which EU has said that you have to fulfill and sign a readmission agreement. A readmission agreement is an agreement in which, if there are illegal migrants coming into the EU countries, those people will have to be returned to Turkey if they are coming from Turkey. And this is an agreement in which it's costly, but it's something that's very important for the EU. In return, we hope to negotiate a visa-free regime. We are continuing these talks. As we speak, we had a meeting, I think, last week. This is a very important issue for Turkey, and I think that if we can actually do this, it would be a major boost in our relationship. Trade, I just mentioned that. Despite the fact that trade with the EU is declining in percentage terms, it is still the #1 destination. And the reason why it is declining is not that the volume is not diminishing. It's the fact that we are opening up to new areas of trade. We are opening up to Africa, Asia, all those other countries. We have opened up new embassies in those places. And so the numbers are just growing up there. Fight against terrorism, of course, is a very important component for us. We feel that most of the PKK elements are residing in Europe, and they are getting, of course, a free ride in certain respects. They are providing financial assistance to the terrorist groups, and therefore it's very important to have cooperation in this field. Next month, on the 22nd of January, there will be a trilateral meeting between the Ministers of Foreign Affairs, Interior, and Justice Minister in Brussels with the Belgian side. And this is just to show that there is a lot of cooperation going on in this field. And finally, of course, participation to EU programs. So actually, most of these things are already happening, but the Commission wanted to give it a positive spin, and that's why they call it the positive agenda. For us, as I told you, we're focusing on these 4 areas, basically. We're trying to make the EU relevant again in Turkey. As you described rightly, in Turkey, proponents of EU accession has diminished. And this is a quite unfortunate situation. If I can go into it a little bit more, I'd like to say that there are a number of reasons for this. Ever since we started negotiations in 2005, soon afterwards, we've had some hiccups. And one of them was, of course, on Cyprus. Since Cyprus blocked some chapters, that took the wind out of the sails of our accession drive. But most importantly, the statements heard from a number of very important statesmen in the EU, namely Mr. Sarkozy and Mrs. Merkel. They are not proponents of Turkish accession. On the contrary, they don't want it to happen at all. Nevertheless, at least there's a distinction between the Chancellor and the former President. The Chancellor had said that Pankos Servanda, if Turkey fulfills the conditions, then they would go with it. But for Mr. Sarkozy, he was adamantly against it. He said that Turkey has no place whatsoever in the EU. And therefore, he always proposed some other kind of, as you said, privileged partnership. So the privileged partnership was given a bad rap, a pejorative term, and therefore always refused in Turkey. So, and also, we heard that even if we do solve the Cyprus issue, resolve it one way or the other, we still won't have to be members. So all these negative effects, all these statements, of course, did not figure well in the popular mindset. So that's why we have tried to concentrate on those issues which are more positive. On foreign policy, as I told you, we see eye to eye on many issues. We try to coordinate very much with the EU. And of course, energy. You probably heard of the Nabucco pipeline. But not only that, there are other pipelines that are of interest to the EU. And we need to concentrate on those positive aspects. And as I mentioned before, the visa issue is crucial for a number of people. It's the most, let's say, concrete example of coordination. It will show that the EU is not closed to Turkish citizens. Right now, there's a feeling of, why should I go to the EU? They're not going to accept me anyway. So, if I could mention the obstacles, because it varies from one member to another, and I'll go into more detail. These obstacles, if you go from one country to the other, they can be influenced by all of these components. Either one, a couple, or almost all of them. And we believe that they're all relevant. They are all justified for those countries. I mean, if I show empathy to those countries, I would accept it. Because although the EU is an entity of values, it is, of course, dependent on culture and religion. So for those people who feel that way, Turkey has no place. Geography, that's another debatable issue. Is Turkey in Europe or not? If Cyprus is a member of the EU, then Turkey should be as well. All of the name Europa came from Turkey. So you can find a lot of arguments back and forth. History. Well, I mean, historically, I think that's the most important argument by certain countries. Turkey, or the Ottoman Empire, has influenced European history. We have been together at it for a number of centuries. We have been pushed out, maybe, from the major continent, but I think that we have influenced history together. So, but I remember in Austria, where I served, 1683 is still in many people's minds. So we still have long, long memories. I think the most important areas in which I could understand even more are those population, labor, and institutional areas. What do I mean by that is people are afraid that if Turkey joins, then they will take over the labor force in these countries. Well, as we know, when the Poles and the Czechs and the others joined, there was a 7-year period in which they were prevented from having any employment in the EU countries. This could be arranged. And frankly, now with the economic boom going on in Turkey, there is probably no need for any Turkish citizens to come to Europe. In fact, we're seeing a lot of pull from Turkey, in which many people from EU countries are coming to Turkey to find work. We have now people from Romania, Greece, and Bulgaria that are finding employment in Turkey. Population and institution. I think these are the most relevant and, let's say, understandable obstacles in front of Turkey. Because if and ever we do join, we will have the same population or similar to Germany. That means that we should have the same rights as Germany. This means that we will have the same number of parliamentarians, same number of votes, same number of, let's say, allocated arrangements in the Commission, and therefore a change in the institutions probably. And up until now, since the driving force for the EU has been Germany and France, they don't want another country at the table, sitting equally. So we have to alleviate this fear as well, that if we join the Union, it will not be to rock the boat, on the contrary, to be strengthening the EU. But this is an inherent fear, and I think this is the most logical one that I can subscribe to. Now, as I said, I mean, these obstacles could be rational or irrational. There's a lot of emotion still going on with regard to Turkey, and Turkey is an area in which, when you talk about it, it elicits a lot of emotion, positively or negatively. Those who have gone to Turkey are in a different mood. Those who have never even met a Turk have a different mindset. And of course, it changes from a country if there is a Turkish community there or not. For example, if you are from Portugal, you have a different mindset towards Turkey. But if you are from Austria, the Netherlands, or Germany, you probably have a different kind of thinking towards Turks. One constant obstacle is Cyprus. Now, if I can go into that for a few minutes, it's been there with us for at least 50 years now as well. In 1960, when Cyprus was first established, things were going well. In 1963, we had the first difficulties, and that's when the UN sent its peacekeeping troops. In 1974, when there was a coup d'etat instigated by Greece, Turkish forces landed on the island and they carved it up into two. And since then, this is basically the situation. There are two entities on the island. The southern side is recognized by the whole world, while the north is recognized only by Turkey. And this situation continued for a number of decades, and up until 2004, we had a big opportunity that you probably have heard of. There was a referendum on the island for the Annan plan at the time. This was going to bring those two entities together in a loose kind of federation, and they would be sharing power. In the end, the northern part said yes to the referendum, the southern part side said no, and since then this division has continued. So we have failed to unite the island, while as the southern part has joined, and of course the obstacles are continuing. And Cyprus has thought that they can use the EU card to gain more from Turkey. This has not worked. If the accession process had proceeded normally, like it did for Croatia, then the Greeks would have the leverage that they wanted to. But since as I told you, we heard all the negativity towards this issue, and even the fact that even if you resolve this issue, we won't have you as members, that just took out all the leverage that the Cypriots wanted to have. Right now, another obstacle I think that we haven't talked about is the EU itself. The EU is going through a major crisis right now. Unfortunately, hasn't been able to overcome it yet. We are confident that it will, because it has done so in the past. The EU has gone through a number of crises and it has come out of it much stronger. And we are confident that it will do so again. But in the meantime, we're also hearing a lot of, let's say, news and articles about what kind of the EU should come out of this. Maybe there's a silver lining of this crisis is that the institutional changes could be done, and therefore there could be some different kinds of memberships. You might remember in the last treaty, in this one, they finally gave the option of moving out of the EU. This was not there in the previous treaties. So maybe in another treaty, which they're talking about, it's just talk right now, there could be a new kind of EU in which there would be different cores, concentric circles. You know, that discussion has been going on for a number of decades anyway. But now let's say it's coming more to the forefront. So if there is any kind of change to how the EU is working, if there are different kinds of membership, this could be a way that could ease our relationship. Doesn't mean that we're already looking for a different kind of relationship, but under the present circumstances, if this continues like this, then the changes that we see, and I'll talk about that in a minute, in the future, these are all palliative changes. So we need a big game changer, and maybe the EU itself, while it's changing, could provide that for us. The Turkish-Ghanaian situation used to be an obstacle. Now it's not. On the contrary, people are saying that the Turkish economy is providing some help and cooperation to the EU. In the last two Council conclusions, last year and this year, the EU mentioned the Turkish economy in a very positive sense. So while it was a problem for a number of years, or a number of decades in fact, now this has changed. And if we can keep this up, if we can keep up the economic situation and the growth rate and all the progress, this could be actually a major factor in a positive sense. So what now? Just to recap one thing which is very important for all those people who are against EU membership. Let's be very clear that Turkey has benefited from the EU accession process in all aspects. We have made a number of political reforms, social reforms, economic reforms in all areas. And therefore, Turkey has benefited from this. We have not suffered one bit. On the contrary, our standards have been lifted in all these areas. And so one cannot complain that we have lost time. We have lost time maybe in the fact that we have not been able to do it much more quicker. We should have been able to reach the higher standards much more rapidly. This is the only thing that we could complain about. But the accession process has helped us immensely. And not only internally as well, it has helped us in our foreign policy. The fact that we have had this relationship with the EU has been a boon with our relations in the Middle East, in the Balkans. The fact that we have this relationship is an added factor in the attractiveness of Turkey in the Middle Eastern countries. And sometimes people overlook this. So what we have to do is, whether we have the help of the EU or not, we have to continue the reform process. We are discussing, for example, another package of political reforms. You probably have heard some complaints about the journalists, the freedom of speech, etc. And the reform packages that we're going through are happening because of our own, let me say, our own momentum inside the country. Because the EU accession process has brought on a new kind of mindset in Turkey for the last 10 years. And this is now going on by itself. It's self-perpetuating. There is no actual need for outside pressure. The inside pressure itself is forwarding all, let's say, the reforms. Albeit slowly, but it's there. And we hope that one day this current will turn into a big wave. As I said, this goes without saying. Our goal is, of course, to reach the highest standards in all areas. I think we have to be patient on the EU side as well, that they come up with a new idea, a new structure, a new kind of relationship, if this relationship doesn't go forward as we want it to. And we have to convince all the stakeholders that Turkey actually, wants to strengthen the European Union, enhance it, if it ever joins. Because after so many years of trying to join, and of course we would want to join something to strengthen it, not weaken it. There's a lot of complaints of the UK, and that they're not playing correctly, and they want to leave in certain areas, and they're not joining all of the spheres of the Union, whereas we would want to join all the spheres, if possible. Therefore, our goal is to make the EU relationship with Turkey a win-win situation. So, our goal is Turkey and the European Union. This is the end of my PowerPoint presentation, but I'd like to go a bit more further on our relationship with the world. There has been a lot of criticism towards Turkish foreign policy, especially a year or 2 years ago, whether Turkey was moving away from the West. And this was instigated by the fact that we were becoming more active in the Middle East, in the Balkans, in Africa, elsewhere. We were in the Security Council. We voted against a UN resolution at the time that the US and other Western powers had mentioned with regard to Iran. And then we had a spat with Israel. So these two events that happened one after the other, of course, brought in a lot of questions into people's minds whether Turkey was having a second thought. And of course, at the time, the EU track was off balance. So the thing is, it's not. Turkey is now having a much more wider way of thinking towards the world. 20 years ago, when the Cold War just ended, issues were black and white. It was very easy to be a diplomat at that time, because it was the big powers that decided for you, and you would just follow suit in your own way. In those days, for Turkey, the only important issue was Cyprus. But now, for us, every issue is important. We have an idea on almost every issue, whether it's climate change or the situation in Myanmar. In fact, we opened an embassy in Myanmar. So Turkish foreign policy is now much more active than ever before. But this is happening for two reasons. We've always wanted to be more active, but we didn't have the opportunity. The world was not conducive for this. As I told you, the Cold War did not permit this. But now, since many countries are changing, the Soviet Union has relapsed and is not as active as it used to be. The US is much more selective. The EU's foreign policy is not as effective as it should be. Therefore, Turkey had some opening in the Middle East, in the Balkans, and elsewhere. And secondly, most more importantly, the economic drive and the progress that we've had provided Turkey with opportunities that it never had economically. 30 years ago, when I first joined the service, Turkey was getting development aid, and now it's providing development aid. We have a development agency that is providing €1 billion every year to a number of countries. So this gives us the clout as well. So with these two elements in our hands, Turkey has become much more active. Our foreign minister is running around everywhere. It's very hard to get a hold of him. And this has changed the way in which our foreign policy works as an institution as well. In the past, it was very easy, as I told you, that you would not have to think on any issues. They would be thought for you by the bigger countries. But now we have to have an opinion on everything, so we have to think more. And this is, I think, an issue which we relish, because this is why we joined the service, to be able to do something meaningful. And I'm very happy that I was able to be in this part of my life, to be in the service before I retire, to actually see that we can do something in our foreign policy. So this Turkey is the new Turkey, in which we have a much more meaningful and open foreign policy towards all issues in the world. The fact was that people were not used to or not ready for the new Turkey, and so they were criticizing Turkey a few years ago. I think now they're getting used to this idea, because they've seen that basically we have not moved away at all. We are still in NATO. In fact, we have a radar system that is now being established in our territory. So there are many examples to show that we have not moved away 1 inch. We are committed to the Western ideal. We have the same values. We do still want to be part of the EU. But Turkish foreign policy and Turkey itself has changed, and I think for the better. One last example before I conclude, the Kurdish issue. That was a no-no. We've not even used that word in the past, especially when I joined the service. Now we can talk openly about it. There is no taboo issue in Turkey, whether it's the Kurdish issue or the Armenian issue. We talk freely about everything right now. So this is the new Turkey. Of course, we see it much more closely ourselves, but it's already difficult to explain the old Turkey, and now we have to explain the new Turkey. So that's causing a lot of confusion. So people are sometimes against Turkish membership because they have the old idea in mind, whereas the new Turkey is already flourishing and moving ahead. So I think it's incumbent upon us to explain to you what this new Turkey is, and this is what I try to do. So in my final words here, before I answer your questions, we are totally committed to our goals of achieving the highest standards for our people, and the way to do it is to open up, to be more democratic, have the rule of law, and hopefully join the Union. So we hope to do it together. Thank you very much.